Hi everyone, my name is Ladepo Sunday Emmanuel. Today I'll be talking about the French Revolution, which began in 1789 and lasted until 1799. It was a period of profound social, political, and economic upheaval in France. This event not only transformed the French society, but also had far-reaching consequences that affected the rest of Europe and eventually the world. The revolution was rooted in deep-seated issues within French society, particularly the rigid social structure that divided people into three estates. The first estate consisted of the clergy, the second estate comprised the nobility, and the third estate, which included the vast majority of the people or the population. It was made up of the commoners, including the peasants, the workers, and the bourgeois, that's the emerging middle classes. This system, also known as the ancient regime, was inherently unequal and led to widespread discontent among the lower classes. Now, talking about the three estates or estates in France, the estate system in pre-revolutionary France was a deeply entrenched social hierarchy that divided the population into three distinct orders or estates. So each estate had its own rights, has its own privileges and responsibilities, and the system was one of the key factors that contributed to the social tensions leading to the French Revolution in 1789. Now, you understanding the structure and dynamics of the estate is crucial for comprehending, understanding the underlying causes of the revolution. Now, talking about the first estate, it consisted of the clergy, who were responsible for the spiritual well-being of the population, played a significant role in governance of the country, and despite their relatively small numbers, it's approximately 100,000 people in a population of around 25 million. The clergy wielded enormous power and influence. They owned about 10% of the land in France, which provided them with significant income through their rent and tithes. The clergy, that's also the church, they were exempted from many taxes, including the tithe, which was the principal direct tax. Instead, the church paid a voluntary contribution known as the free gift to the crown, which was typically of far less than what they would have owed under regular taxation. Now, this exemption contributed to the widespread resentment, particularly among the third estate, who bore the brunt of the tax burden. The first estate was not a monolithic group because there was a significant divide between the higher clergy, such as the bishops, the abbots, the monks, the popes, and the likes, so who often come from noble families and they live in considerable luxury, and the lower clergy, such as the parish priests, who were usually of common origin, and the condition is not much better than those of their parishioners. So these internal disparities often led to the lower clergy to sympathize with the demands of the third estate during the revolution. The second estate was composed of the nobility, who numbered about 400,000 people. The nobility was divided into the nobility of the sword and then the nobility of the robe. So they are divided into two. Now, the former, that's the nobility of the sword, they were the traditional warriors aristocracy, whose privilege was based on military service to the king, and then the later, they were individuals who had acquired their noble status through holding judicial or administrative positions, so often purchasing, sometimes they even purchased those offices, and then they were frequently hereditary. Now, the nobility, just like the clergy or just like the first estate, they enjoy numerous privileges. They were exempt from paying taxes, including the tithe tax, and even had exclusive rights to hunt, to carry sword. They wear certain types of clothing. They also had a monopoly on high-ranking positions in the military, in the church, in the government. The nobility also owned about 25 to 30% of the land in France, which they often leased to peasants in returns. The peasants owed various federal dues, which were a source of considerable income for the nobility. Now, this economic arrangement, combined with the nobility's disdain for the bourgeoisie and the lower classes, now created a deep-seated animosities. However, the nobility was not a homogeneous group either. So there were significant difference between the wealthy, the influential nobles who lived at the king's court in Versailles, and then the provincial nobility. So many of them were less affluent and then more in touch with the concerns of the local population. Some of the provincial nobility, especially those who were less wealthy, also sympathized with the third estate grievances. Now, the third estates were far by the largest, comprising approximately, let's say, 98% of the population in France. It included, a diverse range of people from wealthy bourgeoisies, such as merchants, lawyers, financiers, to urban workers, to peasants, to rural laborers, and host of others. And despite the vast differences in wealth and status within the third estate, they shared a common burden. They were subject to heavy taxation and had little or no political power. the bourgeoisie were the upper stratum of the third estate. So they were often well educated, they were prosperous, many were as wealthy as the lower nobility, but they were excluded from the privileges that came from the noble status. The bourgeois were heavily involved in commerce, in industry, in intellectual life, and they were the driving force behind many of the Enlightenment ideas that criticized the old regime. And despite their economic importance, they were frustrated by their lack of political influence and the rigid social hierarchy that prevented social mobility. Urban workers and artisans who made up the level of the third estate, they live in increasingly difficult conditions, particularly in Paris and other major cities. They faced rising food prices, stagnant wages, frequent unemployment. These hardships were exacerbated by the poor harvest of the late 1780s, so which led to food shortages and increase in the cost of living. The urban people were highly susceptible to the radical ideas spreading through the cities, and they played a key role in many of the revolutions, most violently and decisive movements such as the storming of the Bastille. Well, I'm going to explain that later as time goes on. And at the bottom of the third estate were the peasants, who made up of the vast majority of the French Revolution, French population. They were heavily burdened by feudal obligations, which included paying rent to the landlords, tied to the church, taxes to the state. And in addition to these financial burdens, they were also subject to various forms of unpaid labor, such as covey, which required them to work on public projects such as roads, bridge, dams, and like that. The peasant resentment towards the feudal system was one of the main driving force behind the revolutionary fervor that spread through the countryside during the Great Fear of 1789. When peasants rose up against their landlords, against their laws, the clergy, the church, the kings, and like so, destroying records of their obligations, and in some cases now they attack manor also. An example that illustrates this deep social division and tension between the estate can be seen in the event leading up to meetings of the Estate General in 1789, when King Louis XVI called the Estate General to address the financial crisis. So each estate was asked to compile a list of grievances known as the Cashier de Doléances. So while the first estate and the second estate focused on maintaining their privileges, the third estate called for sweeping reforms, that is the demand for a revolution, so including more equitable taxation, the abolition of feudal privileges, the greater political representations of the first and second estate, excluding the third estate. Now the failure of the king and the privileged estate to address this demand led to the third estate to break away from the National Assembly, setting up the stage for the French Revolution. Another critical reason for the French Revolution was the economic hardship. The economic hardship was one of the critical factors that paved the way for the French Revolution, creating widespread discontent and driving the population to demand radical change. You see, by the late 18th century, France was mired in a financial crisis, and that was a result of decades of fiscal mismanagement, mounting national debts, and a deeply unjust tax system. The economic difficulties were felt most acutely by the common people, particularly the third estate, who bore the brunt of the financial burdens, as I've said earlier. And one of the most significant contributors of France's economic woes was its involvement in expensive wars. That's the 7 Years' War, that's from between 1756 to 1763. And more notably, France's participation in the American Revolution, that was between 1775 to 1783. And these revolutions and then these wars left the country with a staggering debt. The French government under King Louis XVI borrowed heavily to finance its military campaigns, relying on loans with high interest rates. And then by the 1780s, national debt has reached an unsustainable level, with more than half of the government's income going towards paying the interest on these loans. And then this financial strain left the state struggling to meet its other expenses, including maintaining the army, supporting the courts, and funding public works. And in order to address these mounting debts, the French resorted to increasing taxes, but the tax system was inherently flawed and highly regressive, and the burden of taxation fell disproportionately on the third estate, which included the peasantry, the urban workers, the bourgeoisie. And then in contrast now, the fourth and second estate, consisting of the clergy and the nobility, they were largely exempted from direct taxes, and the clergy made a token contribution to the state in the form of the free gifts, whereby they give to the state, and while the nobility enjoyed various privileges such that shielded them from most forms of taxation, such as the title tax, the land tax, that was the principal source of revenue for the government. And the inequitable tax system exacerbated the economic hardship faced by the common people. the peasants, who were made up of the vast majority of the third estate, they were particularly at ease by the tax. They were required to pay, not only state tax but also federal dues to their landlords and tied to the church. These financial obligations consume a significant portion of their income, leaving them with little to sustain themselves. The situation was worsened by the practice of tax farming, where private individuals or companies collected tax on behalf of the government, often with little oversight. And then this system encouraged corruption and abuse, as tax farmers frequently overcharged the populace and to minimize their profits. Now, this financial strain on the third estate was compounded by poor harvest in the late 1780s, which led to food shortages and a sharp increase in price of bread, a staple food for the majority of the population. The harvest failures of 1787 and 1788 were particularly devastating, resulting in widespread famine. And the price of bread, which typically accounted for the largest portion of the workers or peasant diet, skyrocketed, making it increasingly difficult for ordinary people to afford basic sustenance. And in Paris, for example, the price of bread doubled in the years leading up to the revolution, leading to bread riots and increased desperation among the poor people or the urban poor. Now, the economic crisis was not limited to the rural population. Also, urban workers, especially those in Paris and other major cities, they also faced their conditions. The rise in food prices, outpaced wages, leading to a decline in the standard of living for many. Unemployment was rampant, particularly in industries dependent on exports, which had been disrupted by international conflicts, which France had, involved itself in, and some trade restrictions. Now, the economic downturn led to significant increase in poverty and homelessness, fueling anger and resentment towards the government and the upper classes. The bourgeoisie, on the other hand, and the wealthier among the third, the wealthier and the more educated members of the third estate, or they also experienced economic hardship, not different from their counterparts, the urban and then the peasants. Now, many bourgeois were successful merchants, they were financials, they were professionals. They were frustrated by the barriers of social mobility imposed by the rigid class structure in France during this period. And despite their economic success, they were excluded from political power and subject to the same heavy taxes as the rest of the third estate. Now, the bourgeois were incensed by the feudal privileges enjoyed by the nobility, so which they saw as outdated and unjust. So their growing frustration and the economic and social system played a crucial role in shaping the revolutionary ideology that called for the abolition of feudal privileges and the establishment of a more meritocratic society whereby everybody will be free, we have the same rights and equal participation, equal political participation. Now, this financial crisis now reached a tipping point in the late 1780s when the government, unable to secure more loans, was forced to consider reform. And King Louis XVI finance ministers, which includes Jacques and Charles Alexander de Calonne, they attempted to introduce new taxes and financial reforms to stabilize the economy. For instance, now Calonne proposed a universal land tax that would apply to all property owners, regardless of their estate, as well as the reduction of internal trade barriers and the abolition of certain feudal privileges. However, these proposals were met with fierce resistance from the privileged classes at the first and the second estate, particularly the nobility, who were unwilling to surrender their tax exemption and other advantages. And in an attempt to push through these reforms, King Louis XVI called for the Exchange General to convene in May 1789, and this assembly had not been convened since 1614 and was intended to address this financial crisis and then to find a solution to the nation's economic woes. However, the meeting of the Exchange General quickly exposed the deep divisions between the estate, and then it set the stage for the revolutionary event that followed. And the third estate, frustrated by the lack of representation and the refusal of other estates to agree to equitable reforms, broke away from the National Assembly, signaling the beginning of the French Revolution. Economic hardship in France during this period was not merely a backdrop to the revolution, but a driving force that propelled the revolution towards radical change. The crushing debt, the regressive tax system, the rising cost of living created a climate of desperation and anger that made the existing social and political order untenable. And then the revolution was in many ways a response to the economic injustice that had plagued France for decades, as the people sought to create a new society in which the burdens of taxation and economic hardship were more fairly distributed, among the third estate, among the three estates, that's the first, second, and third estate. Now, the economic crisis, therefore, was not just a catalyst for the revolution, but a central issue that shaped the goals and demands of the revolutionary movement, and then ultimately now leading to the overthrow of the Haitian regime and the reformation of French Revolution. Another thing to understand here is the intellectual climate of late 18th century France. It was a critical factor that contributed to the revolutionary fervor, setting the ideological foundation for the French Revolution. Now, this period was marked by the Enlightenment age, and it was a broad and influential intellectual movement that emphasized reasons, that emphasized individualism and skepticism of traditional authority. The ideas generated during the Enlightenment did not only challenge the established, social and political order, but also inspired a generation of thinkers and activists to envision a new society based on principles of liberty, of equality, and fraternity. Now, the Enlightenment was characterized by a profound belief in the power of human reason to understand and to improve the world. We have thinkers such as Voltaire, DJ Rousseau, that's Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Montesquieu, and Denis Diderot. They all played a crucial role in shaping the intellectual climate. Now, they question the legitimacy of absolute monarchy, the divine rights of kings, the traditional hierarchical structures of society. They argue instead for the application of reason and critical thought to all aspects of life, including the politics, the religion, the economics, and every facet of human life. For Voltaire, let's take for instance, was one of the famous Enlightenment figures. A vocal critics of the Catholic Church and then the French monarchy. He used his sharp wit and his prolific writing to attack the injustice and the abuse of power perpetrated by these institutions. Voltaire advocacy for civil liberties such as freedom of speech, freedom of religion, separation of church and the state, and all aspects of politics and the church. It was resonated with the increasingly discontent bourgeois and educated classes. His works, including the Candle and the letters concerning the church, the English nation actually. So he highlighted the contrast between the oppressive systems in France and the more liberal political arrangements he admired in Britain, thereby encouraging a critical view of the French government. We also have the likes of J.J. Rousseau, that's Jean-Jacques Rousseau, was another key figure whose idea they play, influenced revolutionary spirit. Rousseau's concept on the general will, as circulated in his work as the social contract, was particularly revolutionary. So he argued that legitimate political authority comes not from divine right or tradition, but from a social contract agreed upon by all members of society, of the community. Now, according to J.J. Rousseau, the general will represents the collective interest of the people. The government should act towards a steward of this will, that is the will of the people. This idea directly challenged the absolute power of the monarchy and the notion of hereditary privilege, suggesting that sovereign reside with the people and that they have the right to overturn a government that fails to serve their interests. J.J. Rousseau now emphasized on equality, and his critiques on social inequality also resonated within the common people, or let me say, yes, the third estate in particular, who saw his ideas as a justification for their demands for a more just and equal society. Likewise, the likes of Montesquieu in his seminal work, that is the spirit of the laws. So he introduced the ideas of separation of power as a means to prevent tyranny and protect individual liberties. He argued that the best way to achieve a just and stable government was to divide power among different branches, as the executive, the legislative, and then the judicial system, and then each with its own distinct functions and the ability to check the others. That's the power of the concept of check and balances. So Montesquieu's ideas were influential not only in France but also in the development of modern democratic systems, including the United States of America, constitutions. Now, in the context of this French Revolution, he advocated for a balanced government. So he stood in stark contrast to the absolute monarch that concentrated all powers in the hands of the king during the France period, and then it inspired revolutionaries to seek a system that would prevent the abuses of power they associated with the ancient regime. Now, this intellectual climate of the Enlightenment also fostered a critical view of the feudal system and the privilege enjoyed by the clergy and the nobility. These Enlightenment thinkers now, they argue that these privileges were irrational and unjust, and they were based on birth rather than merit. So this critique was particularly appealing to the bourgeoisies, who despite their economic success were excluded from political power, social prestige by the rigid class structure. The Enlightenment emphasized on meritocracy and the idea that individuals should rise based on their abilities and their contributions to the society rather than their lineage. It shouldn't be built by birth, such as the nobles, the clergy, and the likes. So this became a driving force for the bourgeoisie. And then the Enlightenment emphasized on individuals' rights and the concept of natural law, provided a philosophical foundation for the revolutionaries. That's why the revolution demanded for political and social reform. So this notion that all individuals are born with certain inalienable rights, such as the right to life, the right to liberty, the right to property, the right of speech, the right to speech, and like so. They use it as a form to challenge the traditional hierarchical society where rights and privileges were distributed based on class, that's the first and the second class system. So now these ideas were later enshrined in a revolutionary document such as the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, so which proclaim that men are born and remain free and equal in rights. So this intellectual climate either had impact on the Enlightenment or the revolutionary movement, so which led to the creation of the National Assembly in 1789, whereby the third estate represented the common people were heavily influenced by Enlightenment ideas. So and then when it broke away from the estate general during the meetings to form their new body, so the members of the National Assembly saw themselves as the true representative of the French people, and they sought to establish a government based on their principles of popular sovereignty and then the rule of law. So this action were a direct challenge to the authority of the king and the traditional social order that marked the beginning of the French Revolution. The question is, the French Revolution began in earnest with the convening of the Estates General in May 1789. So it was an event that marked a turning point in French history. This assembly was called by King Louis XVI, no doubt, and it was the first of its kind since 1614, and it was summoned to address the deepening financial crisis that had brought the nation to the brink of bankruptcy, economic hardship, and the likes. So, however, what began as an attempt to resolve fiscal issues quickly escalated into a full-blown political and social revolution that would overthrow the monarchy and then fundamentally transform French society. And by the late 1780s now, French was mired in an economic crisis caused by years of deficit spending, costly wars, and an unequitable tax systems I've mentioned earlier. The government was heavily in debt, and effort to reform the tax structure has been thwarted by the resistance of the privileged classes, particularly the nobility. Louis XVI's ministers, such as Charles Alexandre, Declone, and Jacques Necker, had proposed some vigorous financial reforms, such as a universal land tax that would apply to all property owners, regardless of their estates. However, these reforms were met with fierce opposition from the nobility, who were determined to protect their traditional privileges. That is, the second estate, the first and the second estate, they were not ready to forfeit their privileges, and in contrast as well, the third estate said they are not ready to continue paying tax, so they also demanded for equality, equal tax payment. Now, faced with mounting debt and unable to secure further loans, Louis XVI he reluctantly agreed to summon the Estate General in the hope that he could be able to find a solution to the financial crisis. The Estate General was a representative of assembly composed of delegates from the three estates of the French society. That's the first estate, that's the clergy; the second estate, the nobility; and then the third estate, that's the commoners. So which included the commoners. The third estate included the bourgeoisie, the urban workers, and the peasants. Now, the calling of the Estate General was a significant event because it offered the potential for addressing the grievances of the third estate, so which had long been suffered, and then under the burdens of the heavy taxation and social inequalities. And then in the months leading up to the meeting, so each estate was asked to prepare a list of grievances known as cashier de doléances. So this document revealed the deep divisions within French society. The first and second estate generally focused on maintaining their privileges, as I've said earlier, and then resisting any reforms or any form that would diminish their power. And then in contrast now, the third estate called for sweeping changes, including more equitable taxation, the abolition of federal privileges, the greater political representation. The cashiers from the third estate also expressed a growing sense of injustice and demand for new social order based on merit rather than on birthright. When the Estate General convened on the palace in Versailles, that was on May 5, 1789. So the stage was set for conflict, and it was the stage at the beginning of the French Revolution. We started in earnest in 1789. Now, the traditional procedures for the Estate General require that each estate to meet separately and vote as a block separately. Each estate to vote as a block. And don't forget that I told you that the population that the third estate has the most population in Europe. Now, this arrangement favored the first estate and second estate, which could easily, outvote the third estate despite its much larger population. The third estate, which represented the vast majority of the people, demanded that all delegates meet together in a single assembly, and then the voting must be conducted by head rather than by estate. Now, this demand was based on the principle of equality and the belief that the voice of all individuals should be heard, not just those of the privileged class, or let me say, or the privileged few. Now, the refusal of the king and then the other two estates to grant this request led to a deadlock. The third estate, now frustrated by their lack of influence and unwillingness of the first and second estate to compromise, the delegates of the third estate took a bold and unprecedented step, and on June 1789, they declared themselves the National Assembly, that's the third estate, claiming the right to represent the entire nation. So this move was a direct challenge to the authority of the king and the international social order, and then it signaled the beginning of the French Revolution. Now, the formation of the National Assembly marked a critical shift in the revolution, because the delegates of the third estate were no longer content to merely seek reforms alone now within the existing system. So they now sought to create a new political structure that would reflect the will of the people, that will represent the people properly than that of the ancient regime. Now, the National Assembly declaration was grounded in the Enlightenment principles of popular sovereignty, and then they believe that legitimate political authority derives from the concept of the governed, that's the people, and not from the divine right or hereditary privilege. Now, in response to this deviance, that's the creation of the National Assembly by the Third Society, by the Third Estate, King Louis XVI initially attempted to reassert his authority. That was on June 20, 1789. He ordered that the hall where the National Assembly were meeting to be closed, and then he undeterred the delegates to move to a nearby indoor tennis court where they took the females tennis court oaths, so which was led by figures like Emmanuel Joseph, Cessies, and Jean Slavin Bailey. So they swore not to disband until they had drafted a new constitution for France. So this oath was a powerful statement of their commitment to the revolutionary cause, that's and their determination to bring about meaningful change. Now, when the king, that's King Louis XVI, recognizing the growing support of the National Assembly, he eventually capitulated, that is, he succumbed, and then on June 27, 1789, he ordered the remaining delegates from the first and second estate to join the National Assembly, effectively now legitimizing its existence, as the existence of the National Assembly. And then this consensus, now let me say, this concession did lead to quell the revolutionary fervor. And then in Paris, the situation was becoming increasingly volatile, as rumors spread that the king was amassing troops to disperse the assembly by force. So the people of Paris, they were already suffering from the economic hardship and inspired by the revolutionary ideas circulating in the city, so they began to arm themselves in preparation for a potential confrontation. Now, the storming of the Bastille on July 14, 1789 stands as one of the most iconic and symbolic moments of the French Revolution. This event marked the point at which revolutionary fervor transitioned into open rebellion, and it set the stage for the radical transformation of French society. You see, the fall of the Bastille was not only a significant military and political victory for the revolutionaries, but also a powerful symbol of the people's defiance against tyranny and oppression. You see, the Bastille was a medieval fortress located in the heart of Paris. Originally, it was constructed in the 14th century to defend the eastern approach of the city by the late 18th century. So it had become a state prison used by the French monarchy to detain political prisoners, as well as individuals held without trial or royal order, such as the letters de cachette. See, for many Parisians, the Bastille was a symbol of the absolute power of the monarch and the arbitrary nature of the royal authority. See, its towering walls and formidable defenses made it a visible reminder of the repression that the French people had long endured. And the events leading up to the storming of the Bastille were fueled by the combination of economic hardship, political tension, and growing revolutionary sentiment. And then by the summer of 1789, the French was in the grip of a severe economic crisis. Poor harvest had led to widespread food shortages, and the price of bread, the staple food of the French populace, had risen dramatically. Hunger and desperation were widespread, particularly in Paris, where unemployment and poverty were rampant. The situation was exacerbated by rumors that the king was preparing to use military force to suppress the growing revolutionary movement. And then in the weeks before the storming of the Bastille, Paris had become a hotbed of revolutionary activity. The National Assembly, formed by the representative of the Third Estate, had declared itself the legitimate governing body of France, challenging the authority of King Louis XVI. And then in response, the king began to concentrate troops around Paris, a move that heightened fears among the populace that he intended to dissolve the National Assembly by force. I see the dismissal of the popular finance minister, that was Jacques Necker, on July 11, 1789, further inflamed tensions. Necker was seen as a moderate reformer who was sympathetic to the cause of the Third Estate, and then his removal was interpreted as a sign that the king was aligning himself with the headline elements of the court. And then on July 12, 1789, news of Necker's dismissal Paris, it reached Paris, and then sparking outrage and protest. Crowds of Parisians took to the street demanding the reappointment of Necker and expressing their anger at the king's apparent willingness to resort to military operation or military repression. See, the demonstration quickly escalated into violence as protesters clashed the royal troops throughout the city's revolutionary fervor grew as people armed themselves with whatever weapons they could find. The decision was chaotic, and it became clear that a serious confrontation was approaching or was imminent. And then by July 14, the focus on the unrest had shifted to the Bastille. The fortress was rumored to hold large stores of gunpowder and arms, which the revolutionary desperately needed. Early in the morning, a crowd of Parisians gathered outside the Bastille demanding the surrender of the fortress and then its stores of weapons. The governor of the Bastille was Bernard de Lune, attempted to negotiate with the crowd, but tensions quickly escalated. The crowd grew largely and then more impatient as soon as the situation spread out of control. So the confrontation at the Bastille began in earnest among around the mid-morning, and then when the crowd broke into the courtyard. So despite they are heavily armed and defended by the garrison of soldiers of the Bastille, so the Bastille defense were overwhelmed and then by the sheer numbers of the attackers. So this act of violence further enraged the attackers and the assault intensified. So after several hours of fierce fighting, during which both sides suffered casualties, so the governor of the Bastille realized that further resistance was futile, and then in a last-ditch attempt to avoid the massacre, so he offered to surrender with the Bastille on the condition that his men be allowed to live unharmed. The terms of surrender were accepted, and then the governor of Bastille and then his men were being escorted out of the fortress. So the decision once again turned violent because the governor, that was the Lune, was seized by the crowd who brutally beat and eventually they beheaded him. So his head was then paraded through the streets of Paris on a pike. It was a gruesome symbol of the revolutionary triumph over the force of tyranny. See, the fall of Bastille had immediate and far-reaching consequences. Politically, it was a devastating blow to the authority of the monarch, because the capture of such a powerful symbol of the royal power demonstrated that the people were capable of challenging and defeating the king's forces. See, the news of the Bastille fall spread quickly across France, and then it inspired revolutionary uprising in different towns and cities throughout the country. So in many places now, local authorities were overthrown and the revolutionary movement gained momentum. The storming of the Bastille also had a profound impact on the National Assembly, so which has emboldened by the popular support of the revolution, because they felt that they have been supported by the Third Estate. So now, in the days following the event, now the assembly took steps to assert its authority over the nation, including the abolition of the feudal privileges and the drafting of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. So in other words, now they decided to write a new constitution for Europe, so which enshrined in the principles of liberty, equality, and the fraternity that would become the ideological foundation of the revolution. And then symbolically, the fall of the Bastille became a powerful emblem of the revolution. So it was celebrated as the movement, or let me say, as the moment when the French people rose up against oppression and then it took control of their destiny. The imagery of the storming of the Bastille was immortalized in art, in literature, and in public memory today. And in July 14, which was later declared a national holiday known as the Bastille Day, to commemorate the event. The Bastille itself was once a symbol of royal tyranny, and then it was dismantled in the weeks following its capture. So with its stone used to build a bridge known as a Pont de la Concorde, so symbolizing the hope for a new era and peace and unity in France. And then the storming of the Bastille was more than just a military victory. It was a profound statement to the power of the people, their determination to overthrow an unjust system. So it marked the beginning of a revolutionary process that would ultimately led to the abolition of the monarchy, the rise of the French Republic, and the spread of revolutionary ideas across Europe and beyond, even in the world today. So the event remains one of the most enduring symbols of the French Revolution. So it represents the courage, the determination, the spirit of the people, and to dare and to challenge the status quo and to fight for what, for a better future. Another thing to note on the French Revolution is the rise of the Jacobins. So the French Revolution entered a significant and a more radical phase with the rise of the Jacobins. So it was a political faction that would come to dominate the revolutionary government, and it drive the most transformative and often violent period of the revolution. You see, the Jacobins, originally known as the Society of the Friends of the Constitution, initially began as a relatively moderate group, but evolved into the most influential and extreme faction within the revolutionary movement. The ascendancy marked a shift towards radicalism, so leading to the Reign of Terror, the execution of King Louis XVI, and the establishment of the French First Republic. You see, the origin of the Jacobin movement can be traced back to 1789, when the club was founded in the wake of the Estates General. So initially it was composed mainly of the bourgeoisie members who supported the constitutional monarch and they sought moderate reforms. The club's name came from its meeting place, that was a former Dominican convent that was on the Rue Saint Honors in Paris, known as the Jacobin Convent. So as the revolutionary progressed, the Jacobins began to attract a more diverse and radical membership, including individuals from the lower classes and those with more extreme views on the need for political and social change. And then one of the key figures in the rise of the Jacobins was Maximilien Robespierre. So he was a lawyer and a politician who became the face of the radical face of the revolution. You see, Robespierre was initially known for his unwavering commitment to the principles of the Enlightenment, particularly his belief in the importance of virtues and in the rights of people. See, his oratory skills and his steadfast adherence to revolutionary ideas won him a prominent place within the Jacobin club, where he emerged as the leader of the radical faction known as the Mountain. The Jacobins' rise to power coincided with a period of increasing internal and external pressures on the revolution. By 1792, France was at war with several European powers, including Austria, Prussia, which sought to suppress the revolutionary government and then to restore monarchy. The war exacerbated existing economic problems, leading to food shortages, inflation, and widespread discontent among the populace. And at that same time, the revolution was facing internal challenges from counter-revolutionary forces, including royalists, refractory priests, and other groups opposed to the radical changes being implemented by the revolutionary government. And the political environment in France became increasingly polarized, with the Jacobins advocating for more extreme measures to defend the revolution and ensure its survival. And then their calls for greater centralization of power, harsher punishment for enemies of the revolution, and the mobilization of the populace against external and internal threats resonated with the growing sense of urgency and the fear among the revolutionary leadership and the people of France. A critical moment in the Jacobins' rise to power was the overthrow of the monarchy on August 10, 1792. And then on this day, there was a large crowd of Parisians, including many radicalized workers and members of the National Guard. They stormed the palace where King Louis XVI and his family were being held, and the king was arrested, and then the monarchy was effectively abolished. The National Assembly now renamed the National Convention, assumed full control of the government, and they declared France a republic on September 24, 1792. And then the abolition of the monarch marked the beginning of the republic, but it also signaled the start of a more radical phase of the revolution, because it was driven by the Jacobins and their allies. The National Convention that was dominated by the Jacobins and their supporters soon found itself facing a series of crises that demanded decisive action. And the most pressing of this was the question of what to do with the deposed king, that was King Louis XVI. And then the Jacobins, which was led by Robespierre, argued that the king must be put on trial and executed as a traitor to the revolution. So they believed that the survival of the republic depended on the complete eradication of the old order, that's the old, or let me say the ancient regime, and then in other words now, the execution of Louis XVI, so which will serve as a powerful symbol for the revolution commitment to its goal. And then in January 1793, Louis XVI was put on trial before the National Convention. He was accused of treason, of conspiracy against the state, and the trial was a highly charged political event, with the Jacobins leading to the charge for the king's execution. So despite attempts by more moderate factions to save the king's lives, the Jacobins prevailed, and on January 21st, 1793, Louis XVI was executed by guillotine, that is, his head was cut off, and then an event which sent shockwaves throughout Europe, and then it marked the point of no return to the French Revolution. And then it is necessary for you to understand that the execution of the king further radicalized the revolution, because as the Jacobins moved to consolidate their power and to suppress any opposition to the Republic, in response to the growing internal and external threats, the National Convention established the Committee of Public Safety. That was on April 1793. It was a powerful executive body tasked with overseeing the war effort and then to maintaining internal security. The committee, which was dominated by Jacobins like Robespierre, George Danton, Jean-Paul Marat, so it quickly became the de facto government of France. So it was now wielding near dictatorial powers in the name of defending the revolution. So under the leadership of the Jacobins, the revolution entered its most radical and violent phase. This phase known as the Reign of Terror. See, the Reign of Terror, which lasted from September 1793 to July 1794, was characterized by systematic use of state-sponsored violence to root out and eliminate perceived enemies of the revolution. The Jacobins believed that the revolution was under siege, and then from all sides by foreign armies, counter-revolutionary forces, and even those within the revolutionary government who were deemed insufficient committed to the cause. So to ensure the survival of the republic, so they argued that it was necessary to employ terror as a tool of governance. The Revolutionary Tribunal was established to try those accused of counter-revolutionary activities. The tribunal operated with brutal efficiency, often dispensing with the formalities of a fair trial. Thousands of people were accused of being enemies of the revolution, and they were executed by guillotine, that is, cutting off their heads. So the victims of the terror came from all walks of life, including aristocrats, the clergy, the peasants, and even former revolutionaries who had fallen out of favor with the Jacobins. So among those who were most victims were Queen Marie Antoinette, who was executed in October 1793, Georges Danton, a former ally of Robespierre, who was also guillotined or was executed in April 1794 for opposing the extreme measures of the terror. See, the Reign of Terror also saw the implementation of radical social and economic policies, because the Jacobins introduced the law of the maximum, which sets the price controls on essential goods to combat inflation and then food shortages. So they also enacted the levy en masse, that is a mass conscription policy that mobilized the entire population for the war effort. So, and then additionally now, the Jacobins also pursued a campaign to the Christianization, aim at that is to reduce the influence of the Catholic Church and then promote the court of reason. So a secular alternative that emphasized Enlightenment values. You see, that's why the Jacobins' effort to stabilize the revolution and then to defend the republic, the extreme of the Reign of Terror ultimately led to their downfall, because by mid 1794, the widespread violence and then the centralization of power in the hands of the Committee of Public Safety had alienated many former supporters of the revolution. Robespierre, for instance, now, who had become the dominant figure within the Jacobin government, increasingly viewed anyone who opposed his vision as an enemy of the revolution. So this led to a climate of fear and paranoia, where even Jacobins were not safe from the guillotine, because he was now a severe man. So now the turning point came on July 27, 1794. That was when a coalition of moderate and disaffected revolutionaries within the National Convention orchestrated a coup against Robespierre himself. So now this group, now let me say this period, that was that was on July 27, 1794. That was when 9 Thermidor, that was year 11, or sorry, year 2 in the revolutionary calendar. You see, the year 2 reaction, as it became resulted in the arrest and execution of Robespierre and his closest allies, because effectively now it ended the Reign of Terror. So, and then with the fall of the Jacobins, now the revolution entered a new phase, and it was marked by a return to a more moderate policy and the dismantling of many of the radical institutions which was created during the Reign of Terror. And it's also necessary to understand that the Reign of Terror remains one of the most controversial and debated periods of the French Revolution, because it was a time when the revolutionary government faced with overwhelming internal and external challenges, which resulted to extraordinary measures to defend the republic and to impose a division of a new society. See, while the terror succeeded in suppressing many of the the immediate threat to the revolution, it did so to So it did so at a tremendous human cost, leaving a legacy of trauma and division that will shape the course of French history for years to come. The terror also raised profound questions about the nature of revolutionary justice, because the limits of state power and the ethics of using violence in the pursuit of political ideas. And then this question continues to resonate in discussions of revolution and state power to this day. And then the revolution officially the French Revolution officially ended in 1799. So when Napoleon Bonaparte, that was a military leader who had risen to prominence during the Revolutionary War, seized power in a coup d'etat. Napoleon's rise marked the beginning of a new era in French history as he established himself as emperor and began a campaign of conquest around Europe. The French Revolution had a profound impact on the world because it challenged the traditional hierarchies of power and set the stage for the rise of modern nation-states. The principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity became central to political discourse, influencing revolutionary movements and in other parts of the world, including even Latin America. And then the revolution also led to the spread of nationalism and the idea that sovereignty belonged to the people rather than to a monarch. Thank you all for your attention and participation in today's tutorial on the French Revolution. I hope you found the discussion informative and engaging. As we conclude today's session, I want to remind you that our journey through history is far from over. Next time, we'll be exploring the fascinating topic of Napoleon Bonaparte's Revolutionary Wars. Don't miss out on the opportunity to learn about the rise and fall of one of the history's most iconic figures. Please check back on our next tutorial where we delve into the battle strategies and consequences of Napoleon's military campaigns. You won't want to miss it. If you have any questions or topics you'd like to discuss beforehand, feel free to reach out to me. Until then, keep curious, keep learning, and I'll see you all next time.